Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third session of the day at Tech Ed. My name's Ron Dunn from Microsoft, and I helped put this program together this year. So if you've got any complaints about the program, come and look for Raja, my colleague. Okay, this session's going to be talking about consolidation. Earlier this year, we surveyed the user groups, and one of the messages that we got back from our community was that you wanted to hear from people like you who were using the products and doing the techniques that we were telling you about in previous Tech Eds. So when we started to think about a consolidation session, it was a very easy choice to decide who was going to present this session. We've got one representative from a customer organisation, one representative from a partner organisation, so you're going to get a great view of what works in reality in database consolidation. Now, I'd like you to join with me in welcoming our first speaker today, Mr. Carl Weibgen. Carl is Senior DBA with Bendigo Bank. He leads the SQL Server database team at the bank, and he's the guy who puts the end to the myth of the grumpy DBA. The nicest DBA I've ever met, Carl Weibgen.
Hi everyone, thank you Ron. I'm Carl Weibgen, I'm Senior DBA at Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, and what we're going to talk about today is instance or physical server consolidation. A few years ago we did a unit of consolidation and we reduced our servers by half. What I've been asked to share with you today are the things that we got right and the things that we put down to life's little learning experiences. Overall, it's been comprehensively positive. And at the end, before I hand back to Ron, I'll give a few pointers of where physical or instance consolidation can apply for you. All right, we split them up into, we'll alternate between them and sort of called them risks and rewards because I didn't want to polarise the two views too much. And as those of us who are DBAs, we all know that the answer is always it depends. Okay, reward number one. When we consolidated our servers, our primary goal, or the two main drivers out of the DBA team were version standardization and SQL Server licensing. We overshot our licenses and we're up for a fairly hefty bill if we didn't do something about it pretty quick. Now, what we're able to do is actually bundle these units of work with other units of work from neighbouring departments. We're under pressure to either retire or replace some ageing hardware, and we're also undergoing a server room relocation. And what we did there was, we partnered a lot of our maintenance outages with the mid-range team. What we find is that with more drivers, it's easier to get your stakeholders' acceptance. SQL Server licensing didn't really do it for some of our business units, but when the mid-range guys came and said to them, we need an outage, and they said, well, you can't have one, they'd sort of give a response that generally was something pretty blunt, like, well, there's a great big wrecking ball going through our existing server room, so we're pretty sure you'll have an outage after that. And so you sort of share some of those drivers and you get purchase for both teams. Okay, on to some of the risks. In your consolidated environment, it's pretty much the same number of databases as was before, in total for your whole organisation, but it's on fewer servers. So you actually have risk of greater impact as a result. Space is a good one. It doesn't take a lot for you to have multiple extents occur in multiple databases at the same time, and suddenly you have a space problem. Similarly with your maintenance and OS patching, you find that the work involved in that, the testing effort for your single server and the planning effort is more. But what I'd like to emphasise here is that while per server your units of work generally are more, overall, because you have fewer servers, it's less. And I'll talk a bit about that later on. Also, unexpected outages. If you have an unexpected outage, generally the work you have to do is about the same. But there's additional work for your escalation points and your incident management people. All right, security implications. Last time I was at TechEd was about 2 years ago, and they had a really good session on best practice for SQL Server security. And a lot of those things that people asked, or that they were suggesting that you do, we're at the server level. And so if you have, for example, Windows authentication versus SQL Server authentication, and you have a Windows authentication only server, you come along and you go to install one database, and the answer for that database is that it only can have SQL Server authentication. If you turn that on, you then make it available to all the other databases. So you have to be very mindful about the impact of those changes across all the databases on that server. The line in the sand. This is one, everyone has their various sets of rules. You have your organisational mandatory rules, and then you have your own, DBA kind of rules that sort of pretty much drive towards, your DBA's sense of neatness and order. DBA myself, I have a few OCDs about our environment, just 1,000 or 2,000. And then there are the ones that are actually, not permissible at all. What you find is you need to know where that line in the sand is, because if somebody's asking you to install something on your shared infrastructure, then if they cross that line, then they actually need to go and requisition a new instance. We actually had a funny case just recently. We had a vendor come in. They wanted to install application with a database, and they said to us it has to go on its own server. I'm going to talk about that a bit later too. And we said, no, we don't do that. It goes on shared infrastructure. And we went back and forwards about IOs and load and throughput. And in the end, they said, all right, we'll put it on the shared infrastructure. And then when we were testing it, we actually discovered that the general user of this application had to be a member of the security admin server group. So due to a dodgy design, we ended up taking it off and putting it on its own infrastructure. Okay, testing restrictions. Shortly after we consolidated, and we consolidated quite a lot, especially in our, even more so in our dev and test lab, the testing manager came to me and said, we need to go and change, we need to satisfy a test case, we need to change the date time on database server. Now that was sort of a bit of a tricky one. Generally, you've got, in those kind of situations, you've got three choices. If you go and change it, it's going to break every database on the server and cause all kinds of grief. So you can do that, but that is not my recommended option. Option two is you can build a temporary instance, depending on the level of testing that you're doing, that may or may not be required. And third option, which is the one we did, is we actually got them coming out of hours, changed the date time when they were finished and changed it back. All right. Staying on risks for servers, one of the trickiest ones is managing your SQL Server collations. And these become particularly tricky where your user database is case insensitive and you're putting it onto a server with a case sensitive collation. There are two sort of main areas that we've come across where that can trip you up. One is variable declaration and usage. If you have a case insensitive database, and it's on a case insensitive server, you can declare your variables and chop and change that case in the use of variables as you see fit. However, if that is on a case sensitive instance, you declare your variable and every usage of that variable has to match that the case in which it's declared. Okay, otherwise it'll break. All right, TempDB objects. When you create objects in TempDB, it will create, and text-based columns or string-based columns, it will create them in the default collation for the server, irrespective of what your user database is. And that can actually lead to some unpredictable results. What we're going to do is actually have a look at a couple of examples. All right, what we've got here, on the premise, we've got a case-insensitive server, and we've got a case-sensitive server and a case-insensitive user database. Does anyone tell me what's going to happen here? All right, what's going to happen here is we're actually going to get an error. We've declared our variable, we've set a value to it, and we've selected to the sysout. And what we're actually going to get is an error because this second one here doesn't match the case in which it's declared. So you'll get a fatal error. Okay, our next one is a little different. And this one is actually the first one you get a fatal error. This one's actually a little bit trickier because you actually won't get an error. What we do is we create our test table, a temporary table called test. We insert values into it, or a value into it, and then we do a select from that temporary table using that varchar column in the predicate. In this one, as I said, it's actually trickier because you won't get an error, but what you will get is because the capital S is missing from the second one, it will actually, you'll get one of two things happen. You'll either get a conversion error, or more likely, you will actually return 0 rows. Okay, and you know, if that one occurs, you may not actually pick it up for a while, so you might be having some unpredictable results for some time. Similarly, this one, if you flip it around the other way and have a case-insensitive instance with a case-sensitive database, you don't want that to match. So again, you'll be getting that unpredictable behaviour. Yes, sorry, I meant to mention that. The way around that is to where you create your objects to explicitly declare that collation. Thanks. All right. Staying on server level settings, but the upside. Okay, reduced overall administration. We've had a drastic reduction in our administration overhead for the DBAs. Your DBA workload can, and it'll differ per organisation, but it'll be a mix of, or a formula based on your number of servers and your number of databases. If you consolidate your environment heavily, then you will have about the same number of user databases, a few less. You won't have as many system databases, but you'll have a lot less servers, and that will be a real tangible benefit. Agile deployment, okay. What we're talking about there is if you structure your backup and your maintenance routines, instead of going through and doing one by one per database, and you actually structure these things so that they actually dynamically get the list of your databases and go off and back them up and do maintenance on the weekend, then it makes your deployment's a lot faster and a lot easier, because someone says to you, "I need a database." You go, "Fine." Okay. You get all the specs, you go and create it, and then that night it gets back up, and on the weekend it gets its maintenance routine, so your reorgs and the like. And the upside of that as well is that if it's all going on shared infrastructure, you don't have to go and build new instances. Okay, reduction in fragmentation of free space. Well, when we did our consolidation, we also changed some of our underlying SAN infrastructure. And what we did was we went from many small drives to smaller number of bigger drives. And we're actually able to reduce those chunks of white space that you have for growth, scattered throughout all these many drives. And we had a bigger chunk that was on the smaller number of drives, but the overall amount of space we needed for that growth was less. And the big upside of that, I'm not sure how many people need to go and requisition space, but if you're in good with your storage boys, then they don't call you a disc hog so much when you go and ask for new space, and they're a little bit more forthcoming because they know you're not putting aside all this other space. Okay, there are now more tools to assist in SQL Server consolidation. Resource Governor is excellent. It's a great tool. It caps given users and resource pools to a maximum cap of system resources. Policy management. Policy management is not there specifically for consolidation, but what it enables you to do is provide standardization across your environment. Okay, it's analogous to group policy in your OS. And with that standardization of your database environment, it makes consolidation easier. Okay, dedicated resources. Ron's going to talk a bit later on about some of the cost savings you can make in your consolidation programs. What you can do is you can take that number and use it to justify contractors. And contractors for these units of work come with two main benefits. One, it speeds everything up and your cost savings are materialised earlier. And two, it actually enables, it means that you don't get distracted by the day-to-day stuff if you want to put your contractor on the day-to-day stuff and you go and do the consolidation. Alternatively, if you stay doing the day-to-day stuff, they stay focused, and that speeds everything up. Okay, onto a bit of a risk. When we consolidated, we were in a rush, and one of the things we skimped on a little bit was analysis. There was a lot of pressure. It was just like, right, here's a server, fill it up, move it on to the next server. So our analysis was there, but it wasn't as thorough as we would have liked, given the time constraints. Now, at the end of our consolidation period, everything was great. But 3 to 6 months later, we started getting a few angry people come down to the DBA department about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And what was happening was one particular application was, through growth and the like, was suddenly running this massive batch, and it was causing some considerable server level contention. So at the end of the day, we troubleshot that issue, and a little further on, we actually ended up separating that system out to some of its own hardware. But the issue there is not that we had to separate it, but rather that our response to this particular problem was a reactive one rather than a proactive one. And if you do your analysis well, you'll know when these points come where you need to separate a bit later on. Again, resource governor. Can't recommend it highly enough. There's a good link there to start with. If anyone's doing some really considerable consolidation, you really need to have a good look at that. All right, a couple of quick ones still on the upsides. When you're consolidating, use the latest version you can. Just simple logic. It means you don't have to go back and revisit maintenance on that server again for a longer period. It'll maximise your return on investment. Standard edition versus enterprise edition. This is one Ron will touch on a bit later on as well. Have a look, if you've got a lot of enterprise edition, have a look to see if you actually need it. If you do version upgrades, and we actually found a number of servers that actually were on Enterprise Edition but didn't need it at all. And there are other uses of Enterprise Edition where, following major version upgrades, those requirements for Enterprise Edition were no longer there. So we actually made a lot of savings on downsizing that edition. Okay, consolidation in DR. This is often a good place to start. We found we're able to consolidate even further in our DR environment. Of course, this is a bit of give and take. You certainly don't want to compromise your DR. So, please don't go away from here saying, oh, Carl said it was okay to have one server in DR when we've got 50 in production. You need to make sure you have that balance. But we actually consolidated in DR first. We replaced all our hardware, and when we looked at that, we found that there were several low numbers of user databases on these instances that had DR. So we just dragged them all over into one instance in production, and then we put them onto fewer instances in DR. And you make the same savings that you do in your production environment. So licensing, hardware, administration and support. Okay, this one's my favourite, but I need my own server. Kind of a show of hands of people who haven't heard that. A question based in apathy. Okay, this one is great because after you finish consolidating, all the Chicken Littles who ran around and said the sky was going to fall in, and they turn around and it's still up there, and then they get over the shock and they actually realise that it's a perfectly acceptable methodology, and we've certainly made it our default going forward. So looking around, everyone's about the same age as me, perhaps a little bit younger, and we had our entry into client server in the 1990s, where you had like maybe a VB3 or 4 front end. You had, if you're really cool, you had Ole or ActiveX business component in the middle, and at the back end you had SQL Server 6.5. People hang on to those ideas, but that was 20 years ago, and SQL Server has evolved hugely, and hardware capacity has increased, I don't know how many times over, but it's done this, as we all know. Again, consolidation is now our accepted accepted methodology. It's our default. When people come in and say, we need to deploy this database, we say, okay, it goes on the shared infrastructure. Whereas before, everything was, we need a new server for this. So now it's actually a really good mind shift where people are saying, okay, it goes onto the shared infrastructure as a default, and if you want to change it, you have to prove it. All right, so where does SQL Server physical or instance consolidation apply? Okay, performance critical databases, and this is not, and what we're talking about here is where the DBAs need to have control and monitoring over critical performance measurements and metrics. Okay, administration reduction from DBAs. The formula I spoke about before. The workload for a DBA is a mix of servers and user databases. You considerably reduce one of those. And finally, cost. You make considerable savings in servers and licensing. Okay, now, if the answer to some of these, well, if this doesn't apply, then I'm about to hand over to Ron, and he's going to introduce Rolf, who's going to talk about some strategies for virtual consolidation. So I'll hand back to Ron. I'm available for questions at the end. We've got the Q&A. I'm also available for any questions, for the rest of the conference and afterwards.
Thanks very much, Carl. Good. I think that was a good introduction to the type of consolidation that most of us want to start with. We want to reduce the number of databases, we want to reduce the number of instances and the number of servers. And that's our DBA perspective. But what I'm finding from Microsoft's view with customers is there are a lot of customers who don't have the DBA resources to do the units of work that are here. And virtualization is the answer in this particular case. Now, in Melbourne, within Microsoft, we have what we call go-to partners. And a go-to partner is the partner that springs to mind when someone says to you a particular topic. My next speaker is Rolf Tesmer from Dimension Data. And Rolf Tesmer is absolutely my go-to partner when we have any question at all about virtualization and consolidation of SQL Server. So would you please join me in welcoming Rolf Tesmer to talk about virtualization and consolidation.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Ron, for the introduction. Let's do a quick non-scientific poll of the room before I kick off. Who here has SQL DBA jobs and tasks in their job description? Just a quick show of hands. Whoa, just about everybody. I'm a DBA too. I'm not too embarrassed about it. Who of you DBAs have ever had a virtual SQL server that performed so poorly, you had to revert it back to being a physical? Show of hands. Okay, it's probably only about less than 10%. Okay, that's actually not too bad. It's probably a testament, I've got to say, to the virtualization technology that's out there today. This is some of the things I'm going to talk about: the benefits, as well as the drawbacks and the risks of virtual consolidation. Okay, for the people that had your hand up, some of the things I'll talk about today may actually ring true and maybe even hit home about some of the things and risks and concerns you might have around virtualization. Maybe some counter activities to sort of get past those. Okay, so my goal today is really not to teach you or train you on virtualization. It's actually not even to train you on consolidation, okay? My primary goal today is to arm you with knowledge and information that you can then subsequently take away and apply to your consolidation projects tomorrow and beyond to make sure you can avoid the pitfalls of virtual consolidation. It's all about building fences at the top of the cliff, not having an ambulance at the bottom of it. All right? Cool. Let's get into it. I'm a SQL DBA, and I want to consolidate. But I've got questions. Why am I doing it? Why am I doing a consolidation in the first place? What are the gotchas? What is going to trip me up when I do my consolidation project? How do I find the right servers to consolidate? And how do I avoid those servers that are going to cause me trouble? The servers that will trip me up. I'm ready to consolidate. I want to do it. How am I going to do it? I'll contrast two options, two methods. We're consolidated, okay? We've done it. But what else can I do? What are the benefits of virtualization that I can leverage for SQL Server? Okay, why are we doing it? Okay, every project in IT always has some sort of catalyst and driver. You don't do projects because you should do projects. Often business drives projects through for efficiency purposes, okay? Consolidation projects and virtualization projects are really no different. There's always a catalyst. First one, cost. Cost is a critical driver for consolidation projects, absolutely, for almost any IT project. If the cost benefit's not there, the project won't get done. Less physical servers, less space, less power equals less cost. Pretty straightforward equation. Key driver. Better, faster, easier platforms management. The network admins love virtualization, okay? It makes it so much easier to manage servers, virtual servers, than it certainly does for physical servers. Great driver, okay? Easy selling point. Simpler approach to SQL licensing. When you virtualize SQL Server, you've got a couple of pretty cool options around licensing that environment to make it easier, and I guess easier to manage more than anything else, manage that licensing, okay? There's two options for you, and I'll contrast those options today as well. Now, there's something missing from this list, okay? There's something missing, and that is, what's there for the DBA, okay? I'm a DBA, and I look at this list, and there's nothing for me, okay? So what's missing? Unfortunately, the bottom line is, as a SQL DBA, you're often not privy to the virtualization discussion. If you are a DBA and you've been involved from a virtualization perspective, from a project perspective right at the start, you're most likely the exception to the rule, okay? Most cases, a decision is made outside the scope of the DBA and the DBA is swept up in that consolidation project, okay? They're required to get on board just because a server that's being virtualized happens to have SQL Server. So they need to get involved. And if they're not involved, unfortunately, things don't go well. Okay, so I'll contrast some of these things today as well. Okay. Now, before I get into the detail, what I want to do is I want to break down a typical virtualization architecture. Okay, so I'm going to try and be virtual vendor agnostic. Okay, so I don't want to try and focus on Hyper-V or VMware or Citrix or whatever it may be. I want to try and be agnostic. So I'll break down a typical architecture. Okay, just so we can get the right picture in our minds. Every virtualization environment is going to have some type of shared storage, okay? That's it sitting down at the bottom. Typically it's a SAN. It's going to have to be some type of shared storage, some type of infrastructure around storage as well. You're going to have host servers, okay? A host server is a physical server that runs the virtualization software itself that creates the virtualization environment, all right? Each host server manages multiple guests, okay? You can have multiple virtual machines running on that host. The host has a set of finite resources which are carved up amongst those guests. CPU, RAM, I/O, network, they're all shared resources. SQL Server uses all of this stuff. You're going to have hosts connected together, okay? So I'm actually talking about a single host here. I'm talking about multiple hosts. You connect multiple hosts together, you interconnect them, you create a farm of hosts, you create a virtual farm, okay? In that farm, you run your guests. Here we have our guests. A guest is a virtual machine that runs Windows OS, some flavour of Windows OS, version edition, etc. That guest is going to be active on one host at any one time only, okay? So virtualization is not a shared set of infrastructure per se. It's actually hosts carved up to provide facilities and resources to guests. That guest will run on one host. Inside your guest, you'll then install SQL Server and other stuff as well. SQL Server analysis services, reporting services, etc. Okay? Just have a look at that pancake stack. You've got SQL Server sitting on top, installed in a guest. That guest runs on a host. That guest uses host resources. The guest is stored on physical storage. There's a lot of layers here, okay? There's a lot of layers, a lot of interactivity. I'll talk about this in a little bit of time as well. Okay. What are some of the gotchas? Okay, I'm going to build my virtual environment. I'm going to have host servers, obviously. What are some of the things that are going to trip me up from the host perspective? Ensure your host solution is in the Microsoft SVVP, Server Virtualization Validation Program, okay? Server Virtualization Validation Program. What this program provides is a set of, I guess, a list really more than anything else, of vendors that are allowed to run or are supported to run Microsoft software, in particular SQL Server, okay? If you're putting a solution together and it is not on the SVVP, you can run it, don't ask for support, okay? Make sure your solution's in the SVVP. Deploy the latest virtualization software on all of your hosts, okay? Why? Features, more than anything else. Performance, security, usability, patching. I'll give you two classic examples. Hyper-V, which is the latest version, the R2 version, only just supported, in the last release, live migration. Before that, it was not supported. You only had quick migration, okay? So if you don't have the latest version, you don't have the latest stuff, you don't have the latest features. VMware, I think it was 3.5, had a bug in it where after a certain date, you couldn't power on your servers, okay? It was because of an issue in the service pack. If you had the latest version, you don't have the problem, okay? Go the latest stuff. Use multiple hosts for production environments, okay? HA and DR, high availability, disaster recovery. The key benefits of virtualization really come from this. If you've got a standalone physical server by itself, you don't really have much in the way of high availability disaster recovery unless you've got clustering or associated facilities like that. When you virtualize with multiple hosts, you actually get it by default, and that's a really big selling point, okay, for a lot of customers. Guess that as physical server standalone, you move it to virtual, you get high availability. Why? You've got multiple hosts. One of the hosts goes down, all the guests can be moved across to the second host. Work quite nicely. But you've got to plan for this stuff, okay? You have to plan for it. If you've packed your host right to the rafters of guests, you've got very little headroom on these hosts. What happens when you fail it over? Guests may not start. Guests may not perform very well, okay? It affects all the other guests as well, okay? So you've got to leave some headroom on these hosts. As a DBA, you probably don't really have much say in this, but you need to be aware of it if you're going to create an active, live, usable environment. Beware of over-committing that host resource. You can do it, okay? Example, you have a host server, it's got 4 CPUs on it. You can overcommit that resource. You can provide 8, 12, 16 CPU, more CPUs to those guests. So in other words, what happens is the guests get slices of compute power for those hosts, okay? So what that basically means when you overcommit resource is slower performance in most cases, okay? SQL Server is not CPU bound, but you can do it with RAM too. You can commit more RAM than you have, okay? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, okay? You can do it for SQL Server. It still works okay. Slower performance, be aware of it. Shy away from a thing called thin provisioning, okay? This is the interesting one. Best said by an example. Guest server has 50 gigabytes of storage, currently only using 5. What will happen at the storage level is 5 gig will be provided at the storage, but the guest will be made to think it has 50, okay? So what happens is when the guest requires more storage, 6, 7, 8, etc., gigabytes, only at that point in time is it provisioned at the storage and allocated to the guest, okay? Works nicely. Storage vendors love it. Admins love it because they don't have to actually have the storage present. They can always add it later. Bad thing for SQL Server, I/O. Has I/O impacts, okay? If you don't really care about it, go for it. If I/O has a big question mark and you're concerned about it, steer clear of this, okay? Again, not much you can do about it as a DBA, but you can talk to your vendor about it. You can talk to your storage administrator about it. Be aware of that. Plan your SQL licensing, okay? I talked about it at the start, but you've got a couple of different options at the host level for licensing SQL servers in a virtual environment. Consider by processor at the host. Best said by an example, you have a host server, it's got 4 CPUs, okay? If you license each one of those CPUs with Enterprise Edition of SQL Server, you can have up to 4 virtual guests per licensed socket, giving you a total of 16, okay? So what that basically means is you can deploy anywhere between 0 to 16 guests on that host and never have to worry about licensing. Each one of those guests can run Enterprise Edition of SQL as well, okay? Really good, really flexible. From a virtualization consolidation perspective, you can simply deploy servers as you need to and take them off as you need to. You never have to worry about licensing. Nice and easy. I really like this. You don't even have to license all the sockets. You can license 2 as long as they're carved up. And from a virtualization perspective, they're only using those 2 sockets. Really flexible stuff. This is quite well documented in the licensing guides. Recommend you read it. Sure. I'll probably have to refer that question over to Ron towards the end of the session, but maybe if you can, yeah. Cheers, thank you. On a cluster. Pros and cons for that one. As typically in IT. Cool. Okay, we've broken down the guests. A lot of stuff to be aware of. Not much you can do about it, unfortunately, as a DBA. Let's look at the guests. A lot of gotchas here as well. Just remember, all the guests you deploy are sharing finite resources. You are getting slices of compute power on those hosts, okay? Not to mention that, but you're sharing the host with all the other guests, all right? So just kind of, there isn't much you can do from the SQL Server perspective, but I'd recommend 3 things. The first one is, from a memory perspective, set your min and max memory for SQL Server. Always set lock pages in memory for SQL servers in a virtual environment, okay? You get some pretty good benefits out of it. You don't guarantee you'll lock the memory, but you can guarantee you'll get better performance as a result. Mind the simple things. Separate your production and your dev guest servers, if possible, onto different hosts. Help isolate dev I/O, dev throughput from your production servers if you can do it. Okay, so simple things. Try and stagger your maintenance tasks as well. Just remember that 10 production servers on one host are sharing the same I/O throughput, the same storage, the same everything, the same memory, the same CPU. Okay, it's going to spike if they all run at the same time. Stagger the times. Mind the simple things. This is a nasty one. Guests can be tweaked without you knowing it as a DBA, okay? The virtual administrator can change just about everything about the environment. They can change how much RAM your guest has, how many CPUs it has. They can change where it runs. They can change its priority. So your slice of the host compute power is actually prioritized lower than the other servers, or higher, okay? You actually won't even know this is happening. So this is a real concern. As a DBA, I sometimes get concerned about this, but unfortunately there isn't much you can do about it. It's just the way it is. I've had cases in the past where we have 2 host servers and they're actually specified the same. CPUs on one host are actually slower than the second host. My guest was moved from one host to another, performing the same activity on slower CPUs at the host. I couldn't explain it. Why in the hell is my server going so slow? Why? Because my guest has moved to another host with slower CPUs. Didn't even know. Okay? I can't check that by looking at the perfmon counters in my guest. I have to go to the host. So it's a real problem. Be aware of it. Virtual software has guest limits. Not all virtual software is created equal, all right? I'll just mention the 2 big ones, Hyper-V and VMware. Hyper-V, CPU, latest versions, CPU, you can have up to 4 CPUs and 64 gig of RAM inside your guest. VMware, the latest is version 5, but we'll talk about 4.1. Is 8 CPUs and 256 gig of RAM, okay? They're pretty big numbers, but basically what that means is depending upon the flavor and the virtual vendor you've selected, not all physical servers will translate, okay? Doesn't mean you shouldn't migrate them, it just means you need to be aware of it again, okay, that they have some concerns around that. Plan for it. Don't assume your SQL config supported, okay? Again, check the SVVP, make sure your SQL Server configuration, version addition, the Windows patch, etc., is on the SVVP and is allowed in a virtual environment. 2 classic examples. SQL 2000, not supported in any virtual environment. Windows 2003, earlier than Service Pack 2, not supported. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't do it, just supportability aspects have a concern. Okay? So you can do it, be aware. Think back to that diagram at the start. The massive kind of pancake layer of virtualization bits of technology, okay? There is a cost to virtualization. There is a cost to emulation to translate that layer, okay? That cost is borne in lower performance for your guests, okay? The latest version of the most virtualization software out there, you can expect about a 5% reduction, okay? Probably won't notice it in most cases. If you've got some of the earlier versions of virtual software, 10%, 12%, okay? The numbers they're getting up there. But as the virtualization software gets better, newer, faster, hence the later versions of virtual software, this number will get smaller and smaller. Bottom line is, it's real and it exists, okay? Expect it. I talked about licensing hosts. Let's look at licensing guests as an option for licensing SQL in a virtual environment. Example, your guest has 4 virtual CPUs. You've got an option to simply license, well, I guess maybe the best way to describe it, 4 virtual CPUs and a guest. You can license each one of those sockets with a fully licensed edition of SQL Server. But however, you may not have to do it on a 1-to-1 ratio. The way that the calculation works for guests in a virtual environment is actually a calculation which is performed that takes into account the number of sockets and cores on your host, the number of sockets, virtual sockets on your guest. In that calculation, a number will be spat out at the end, basically saying this guest will require X amount of licenses to support it. In most cases, it is less than the virtual CPUs on the guest, okay? It's actually less. And the reason that's the case is it comes down to because your guest is actually not really using the CPUs, it's using slices of those CPUs, okay? So the licensing takes that into account. It's quite nice. Again, I could do an entire session on licensing around SQL virtualization. Okay, but this is quite well documented. There's great guides that Microsoft provide around licensing and policies around this. Check it out and be aware of it. There is a line that's drawn, okay? At some point in time, the number of guests that you deploy that run SQL Server will actually be more expensive to license them this way than it will be to license your host, okay? You need to work that out. Cool. How do I find my SQL servers? I want to consolidate, but I need to find the boxes that are right to consolidate. I want to sort of square away the ones that aren't, all right? SQL DBA. They're going to do some stuff. They're going to find the servers. Well, quite simply, they have a list of servers that are known. Okay, as a DBA, you know the servers that you support. You probably get pager alerts for them. You installed some. A good DBA will actually know servers in their environment as a general rule. However, for the servers that you don't know, and you might be surprised, there's 2 tools I recommend. MAP, Microsoft Assessment Planning Toolkit, Quest Discovery Wizard. Both tools are network scanning tools. Both tools are agentless. Both tools are free. Okay, you can download them today. What they actually do is you install them on a machine, they scan your network, they come back and report to you what SQL servers are broadcasting in your environment, where they are, version, service pack, etc., name, IP address. Kind of pretty cool. Now, regardless of which method you choose, and I'd probably say do a combination of all of them, you're going to need this. You're going to have to write some sort of consolidation findings report. It's going to list all your servers, the particulars, version, edition, etc. You're going to have to rank these servers from a virtual consolidation perspective in 2 different buckets. You're going to have to group them and categorize them. You're going to have good servers, okay? Servers which are great for consolidation. You know, you want to consolidate these guys. Not surprisingly, you're going to have bad servers too. Servers you want to avoid because they're going to give you pain, okay? You want to avoid these guys. Let's have a look at them. Let's have examples. Let's see some examples of these 2 groups. Cool. Good and bad servers, servers we should and should not consolidate. I've got 5 examples here and we'll kind of work through them just one at a time. Number 1, outdated or unsupported hardware. These servers are at risk today, okay? They're on hardware which is not supported. No one wants to know about them. They run critical business applications. Should you consolidate them? The board says, yes, they're good. As long as they adhere to the other points, I think they're great targets. They're great consolidation targets, okay? Really good. Not supported today. They're at risk. You can consolidate them onto a supported infrastructure. Generally going to be pretty good. Number 2, servers that are low spec, low utilization, non-critical, i.e. not risky. The board says, great, I agree. Not risky, move them across, you're going to be a hero. Easy. The specification of your server is bigger or as big as your entire host capacity, okay? So in other words, you need a shoehorn to fit this guy into your virtual environment, okay? It's very tight. Should you do it? Board says bad. Why? Kind of defeats the purpose of virtualization. You're going to have a host server running only one guest, okay? Totally defeats the purpose. And not just that, you're actually wearing the emulation overhead that I talked about earlier on, 5%, just to virtualize it. No good. Try and avoid those servers or upgrade your host servers to support it. High throughput, high utilization servers. Good or bad? Good, yeah, maybe. With some testing, you might say, okay, let's consolidate these guys. but chances are they're going to be bad. Now, the reason I say that's the case is if your application cannot wear that emulation overhead, it cannot take the 5 or 10% of that virtualization overhead, you should not consolidate it. Okay? You should not virtualize and consolidate it because it's going to have a cost which is borne to the business in reduction of throughput. So there are some concerns. Test it, give it a try. It's probably going to be bad. Just be aware of it. Virtualization software will probably get to a point very nearly in the future where almost everything can be consolidated. Last one. The spec of your server is bigger than what the maximum limits are for a guest. So in other words, I want a server with 128 gig of RAM. I'm using Hyper-V. It only supports 64. Should I do it? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. You're going to have to test it, okay? You're going to have to test it. I've had cases in the past where the specification's way bigger than what the guest supports. We did it anyway. Some of them worked just brilliantly. Some of them went to custard, okay? So nasty. You're going to have to test it, give it a try. Maybe good, maybe bad. Cool. I'm ready to consolidate. How am I going to do it? 2 different methods. The tried and true manual hands-on migration method done by DBAs world over for eons and eons, okay? Simple migration of servers between database components between servers, okay? SQL DBA, identify dependencies on those servers, plan a path, build your target servers, the virtual servers, test them, go. Pretty straightforward. From a virtualization perspective and consolidation perspective, this is the only method that's going to yield an n-to-1 ratio. The only method that will allow you to reduce your server count, okay? You have to do it manually. Contrast that with P2V, physical to virtual. This time it's the virtual administrator. They run a migration tool. They actually create a virtual machine copy from your physical machine, okay? Now, not surprisingly, you're going to always yield a 1-to-1, always, okay? If your goal is to reduce your server count for your virtualization consolidation project, this is probably not going to be the one for you. You're going to have to do it manually, okay? So what's the manual hands-on method? Identify the candidate dependencies. The DBA is going to reach into that good bucket, pull out the servers which are good to consolidate. They're going to see what they do, how they do it, when they do it, why they do it, who they do it to. They're going to find out what makes it tick. If you want to consolidate 10-to-1, you're going to have to find, match, and verify those candidates. Example, SQL Server 2008, let's get all those guys together, we'll create one virtual server. Alternatively, I've got a couple of servers which are way too heavy on CPU. Isolate those guys, okay? You need to come up with a model that's suitable to the technical and the business requirements, all right? Spec your servers, build your virtual servers, or tell your virtual admin to build them. It's going to have to support your consolidated load. Now, add a percent, n%. I like n because it allows me to tell you a number without having to actually commit to it. So basically what I do is I add about 30%. Now the reason is when you go to your virtual administrator and you say, I need a server with 20 gig, they're going to fall off their chair and say, I'll give you 15. So what you do is you ask for 26. So they come back and they go, whoa, I'll give you 20. Perfect. The reason that happens is it's their job. It's their job to do that, okay? So don't hold it against them. Test your environment, test your guest platform, test your migration plan, test it again, be comfortable it's going to work, be comfortable your application works. Arrange a source outage, go migrate. Go team. Let's contrast that with P2V. Now, I'm not going to tell you about what P2V does because it doesn't really matter, okay? From your perspective, you're just going to get a virtual server from your physical server, all right? But I will tell you 1 or 2 things around SQL Server that you need to be concerned about. So let's look at the pros and cons, the good and the bad. The virtual is a near exact 1-to-1 copy of your physical, near exact. It's not quite exact, okay? Serial numbers are different. Model numbers, controllers, MAC addresses. Who cares? DBAs don't care. If you have an application that's security bound to this stuff, applications sometimes are tied to serial numbers and MAC addresses, that app won't start, okay? Probably not your problem, but it's something you need to be aware of. Physical can be online during the conversion process. Whoa, love it. This is great because you've minimised your downtime during the consolidation process. Not all combinations are supported. If you're virtualizing a DC, God forbid you have a SQL and a DC, you're not supported anyway. Can't do it online. Windows 2000, not supported anyway. Can't do it online. DMZs, okay, there's security issues around this. Applications that don't support VSS, volume shadow copy. This is how the image is taken. Volume shadow copy takes a snapshot of the physical storage and creates a virtual disk of that storage, okay? If it doesn't support VSS, it has to be done offline. Now this begs the question, SQL Server supports VSS, but should you do SQL Server online? Just keep in mind, when that snapshot is taken, it is an instant in-time copy, okay? It's instant in-time copy. At that point in time, after which that snapshot's taken, no other transactions are taken. So you could, quite, lose data, okay? So should you do it online? Maybe, depends on what the application does. My personal view, offline. Take SQL Server offline. Be aware of it. Process can be scripted. Awesome. I've got 50 servers to consolidate. I'm going to script it with PowerShell. No problems. They can take a long time. Physical servers can take a long time to convert over. Okay? It can take hours. My rule of thumb, non-binding rule of thumb, is for each 100 gig of storage, allocate about an hour, okay, for conversion. So what you'll probably find is when you do the migration, it's going to be a combination of manual and P2V. Your P2V, the simple ones where you just do one-to-one anyway, and you'll consolidate the rest manually. Cool. What else can we do? We're consolidated. Let's leverage the benefits of virtual mobility. I love this stuff, by the way. Okay, what is it and why is it so good? It's the online of migration of guests between hosts. So when you have multiple hosts in your farm, you can move guest servers between your hosts, actually with zero downtime, okay, including servers with SQL Server. The guest server is moved between your host in an online fashion and actually can be moved right across your farm and brought back online during the whole process, and up and ready to serve transactions as it continues in the migration. The way it works, it takes a snapshot of the memory, copies it across to the second host, and as that copy happens, pages are still being changed in the first host, but the delta gets smaller and smaller as the copy speeds up. Until such point in time, the copy can complete in about a couple of milliseconds, boom. Second host takes over the guest, deleted from the first host, you're back online, you're running. But at the same time, SQL Server's been serving the transactions the whole time, okay? Now, I might get a couple of funny looks here, but I've got to tell you, this really works for SQL Server. You know, seriously, it does. I've seen it before, and I can tell you that the SQL Server just not miss a beat. You know, it just serves the transactions. It's quite amazing. There's always a catch. Okay, there's always a catch. There's a couple of funny ones here as well. If your guest runs SQL Standard Edition, okay, you have a licensing restriction. You cannot move that guest between hosts any more frequently than 90 days. Okay, there's nothing that physically stops you moving that guest. Nothing that physically stops you. But if you do, you're in violation of the licensing rights of SQL Server, okay? Be aware of that. Another catch. Guests with large memory or high memory load, thinking about how the copy runs, or if you've got host performance issues already, you know, you're strapped for capacity, or you've got slow inter-host communication, so they're very sluggish already. What that basically means is slow migration or no migration, okay? Virtualization, virtual mobility is not free. It costs resources, okay? It costs resources of both hosts. It costs resources of guests because the migration actually costs CPU, it costs memory. So when that happens is you're going to get an impact to all of your guests and your hosts as well, okay? Something to be aware of, okay? So you might not want to do this all the time during business hours, but you can do it. Cool. SQL virtual consolidation. When is it right for me? When should I do it? If reducing your SQL instance count is not a critical driver for your project, so one-to-one is fine, or if you're okay to relinquish some control, some power across your virtual administrators, so taking away from the DBA, and if you're okay to wear across the board very small performance overhead on every single guest that you have, keeping in fact the 5%, virtual consolidation is going to be right for you. If the answer is no, you need to consider database or physical consolidation that Carl talked about earlier on. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Ron, who's going to wrap up with the licensing discussion.
Thank you very much, Ron. Okay, we've just heard from two of the nicest guys in the industry about database and about virtual consolidation. They didn't want to give you the bad news. They left that job to me, right? I'm going to give you the bad news, the stuff that you probably don't want to hear about what's going to happen after your consolidation process. Number one, Rolf just mentioned it, but I want to reiterate this very, very clearly to everyone in this room. Live migration, in particular vMotion, if you're on a VMware platform, is not allowed for standard edition. Now, what does this mean? If you've got a true up, and I come looking for servers that you've got in your organization, and I see that you're running standard edition with vMotion, your boss is going to get a very, very nasty shock when he sees the bill for your true up. Okay? So if you're using live migration at the moment, if you're using vMotion or QuickMotion on the Hyper-V platform, you cannot use standard edition. You need to be licensed for Enterprise Edition in order to support that. If you need to talk about this, yeah, I've got a question. I'll come to that question in a minute. If you need to talk to me about this, please do so. We're happy to talk with you about the options, and the earlier you talk to us about this problem, the cheaper it will be to resolve the problem. Question down the back? No, per host. Sorry, provided I don't find any evidence that you're moving it, it's okay. So on your farm, the best recommendation is to isolate your servers to specific farm, isolate your SQL servers to specific servers in that farm and turn off the rules. Okay, next one. This is one that traps a lot of people. Now, our understanding of these rules has changed over time, but the rule for Microsoft licensing is that your true up represents the number of servers you had deployed during the year. That means that if you've got 100 servers out there and you've got a true up coming and your boss says we need to cut our costs and you go and turn off 50 of them, your true up is not 50, it is 100 servers. Okay? So when you are planning a consolidation exercise, the licenses that you've removed during that consolidation come off next year's true up. Again, talk to us early if you're thinking about this process, because there might be something that we can do to help you if you're in a situation where there have been some mistakes that have been made in your environment and you need to worry about your consolidation. Now, I want to emphasize that point of help. The example that Carl spoke about earlier, the need for consolidation was driven because there had been accidental deployment of too many Enterprise Edition licenses. The guys who built the boxes had just used the one set of DVDs to install the software, and they'd accidentally installed the wrong edition, so they were grossly overusing what they thought they were in terms of license. They came to Microsoft at that stage, said, this is the problem, and Microsoft said, no worries, you've told us about it. Here's the time frame that you've said you're going to fix it in. If you fix it in that time frame, no problem. Okay? So we're not going to come to you and say, you deployed that, even though it was an accident, we're going to bend you over or whatever we might do, and take the license money. We're not Oracle, okay? We're Microsoft. So we're the nice guys. We're going to help you to correct this position, but don't leave it until June the 15th when your true up is due on June the 30th, and my bosses are chasing me for every last little bit of revenue that I can squeeze out of the customer base, because at that stage I've got no room to move. If you talk to me now about what might be a licensing anomaly, I can help you with plenty of time to spare, because we've got time to fix it up and all the pressure's off at this time of the year. But if you come to me at the end of the year, that's the very, very worst possible time for us to be having discussions about how we can help you with a licensing anomaly. Next one, some restrictions. Enterprise Edition prior to SQL Server 2008 R2 supported unlimited virtualization. Now, a plug for software assurance. If you had software assurance on those servers, when we made the change to 2008 R2, you were entitled to maintain that unlimited virtualization on those servers. Enterprise Edition in 2008 R2 supports 4 guests per processor. And this was the example that Rolf was giving you, where if you had 4 procs in a box, you could run 16 guests on that box. However, there is one way to get around that, and that is here. You can license more more processors than the server has installed. That means that if you've got a 4-processor box and you buy 6 processor licenses for that box, you can run 24 guests. So if you're in a difficult hardware position, you can increase the number of guests that you can run on that box. Of course, the best answer is this one. That's Data Center Edition. With Data Center Edition, you are licensed for unlimited guests on a box. So if you've got lots and lots of guests, that's really the edition you should be looking at, is Data Center Edition. Okay, that's all of the bad news that I had to tell you today. The important message that comes out of this is that if you're a virtualization customer or if you're planning a consolidation project and you're not clear on what the licensing implications are, please come and talk to me or Raja or Shashank, any of our colleagues in this team, and we will help you to work out the best solution for you to minimize your costs or maximize your performance or whatever objectives you're trying to achieve. But keep those points in mind. No vMotion for standard edition, and the best option for high volume consolidation is Data Center Edition. And if you keep those rules in mind, you won't go very far wrong at all. Okay, what I'd like to do now, I'm sure there are a bunch of questions that are coming for the guys who have got the real hands-on experience in consolidation. I'd like to call Carl and Rolf back for a few minutes of Q&A from the audience. I'll get out of their way. Feel free to ask them the questions, but they're also going to be here for a chat and some questions either after the session or throughout the rest of Tech Ed. So thank you very much to both of these speakers.
Thanks, Rob. Cool. Any immediate questions, guys, girls? Yes, sir. Yes.
Virtual instances versus custom instances.
Yep.
We consolidate the pros and cons. You know, if you've got a physical server, one on that actual cluster, as opposed to a physical virtual farm.
The benefits and pros and cons of both approaches.
To me, it seems like it ticks one up, doesn't the other? And as a DBA, you lose a lot of that control. You have
Yep.
kind of lose the resources.
Yep.
Which potentially go to other applications and things like that. So.
Yep. It comes down to, most cases, cash. If you've got enough money to spend to buy a fairly decent-sized physical clustered environment,
Yep.
and you're limited to 25 instances on that clustered environment,
Yep.
then that could be a good option for you.
Yep.
If you want to exceed that, I'd probably go to the virtualization route. So it comes down to management. As usual, it depends. It comes down to management requirements and most likely cost. If you've already got a virtual environment, you can leverage it. If you don't, you might go the cluster option. It's hard to answer it unless, maybe we'll chat after this session. Yeah. So.
With this host-based licensing, like we have some spare capacity on the server. If you want to keep future loading, do we have to license that host sockets as well? Or?
Okay. So you can actually license a subset of your virtualization. Yep. If you've got, say, 4 sockets, you can actually license a subset of those sockets. And so you can actually license 2 of the 4, as long as you put, like Ron was saying, you put rules in place that bind the SQL Server guests to those sockets, that's okay. If you share it across the sockets, you must license all, effectively. Yep.
And if you want to, just to add this, if you want to run 4 instances per processor, the catch there is you have to license all physical sockets. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. It's actually a pretty complex area. The guide is like a doorstop. It's this big. So, and I know it intimately. So yeah, we can look at that for sure.
Just 2 quick questions. One for virtual, one for physical. For the virtual, do you guys have any problems with where you submit where the guest has got 4 processes and the host has to wait for 4 of those processes to be available to? We had some serious problems with carrying more than 1 processor.
Oh, right, no.
Where you had to wait for the 4 processes to be available.
No, I haven't. I have to admit I haven't seen it, unless it was overcommitted resource, perhaps.
Yeah, we had some little problems where we had to go back to 1 single processor with performance.
Skyrocketed from there. Did you use MaxStop as well, out of interest on the SQL level? Oh, they weren't SQL boxes?
They weren't SQL, but they were also, they're not even just SQL, it's just you have 4 logical processes. We had to wait for 4 processes to be available before.
I'd almost prefer that to the virtualization guys, because if it's non-SQL, it would be something at the virtualization software level. Yeah, yeah.
I noticed you were talking about consolidation to a single instance. and give two solutions. One where you know, if you've got sysadmin access, for example, you can't instance whereas if you of vanilla Mickey Mouse one, you get a shared instance, I suppose.
It's one of those depends things. You can sort of have all the rules for where that might apply, and the one that is one. And the other ones where people use multiple instances is to just like dedicate specific instances to application database. So I mean, that's not something I would want to do, but if there were a case for doing that, then
I think from our point of view, it allows us to move sort of pretty much along the virtualisation path where they can logically move them, we can actually move the instances.
Yeah, it's a form of isolation, isn't it? But you could also have patching restrictions, so the application might need a version and edition of SQL, which is not the shared instance version. Could be a collation difference as well. Yeah. Yeah, instances are perfect. Matter of fact, we're just doing one of these at the moment. Absolutely. You also got the unit of work for a DBA is one of the Carl's was talking about is actually the instance. So. Any other questions, guys? Yes, sir.
We had a physical environment with about 16 physical boxes. We went through our virtual consolidation exercise and we consolidated everything onto two hosts.
Yep.
However, we find frustrating that the virtual admins are taking over and basically lost control of the platform. And we basically also lost proactivity in the sense that before, when we had a physical environment, we saw a problem in memory, we would detect and fix it right away. Now with the virtual environment, we go to the virtual admins and they say, oh, according to my VM dashboard, everything's right.
I hear, yeah, you're right. I hear that a lot.
Now we're going back to screen away. We're going back to now we're going to perform a physical consolidation. We're going back to physical just because of that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a real shame. So, yeah.
So my question is, one of the questions I'm getting from management is they want to see somehow what the performance gains or loss is going to be. Is there a way to measure that in the current environment, which is virtual, and then extrapolate that to physical, so sort of know what the performance will be?
Yes and no. When you look at performance counters, they're lying, quite frankly, in the guest environment. They're not really telling you what's going on. But what you can look at is application throughput. So something like maybe transactions a second, which kind of doesn't lie because, yeah.
A trace and sort of actually look at the duration for throughput.
Yeah, how much work got done in that time, and that is it's indisputable.
Yeah, I thought of picking the most expensive queries across all the databases.
Well, one of the things I sort of talked about is a lot of it comes down to configuration. So if your virtual environment isn't configured to kind of support SQL Server in a consistent way, and there's some pretty good white papers that Microsoft provide around configuration of SQL servers, dynamic memory, thin provisioning, all those sort of gotchas I talked about. If the answer to all of those is no, in other words, you're not doing them, and you're still having performance issues, then there might be something more sinister at play here. So maybe it is the virtual admins prioritising your servers right down, you know what I mean, without you knowing.